participation in the meeting, all of you. I should say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and whether it would be appropriate or not, others. John Millage was mentioned this evening, and John, he was a member of our executive, long-time Lakefield resident, about a fifth-generation descendant. He up and left for BC, and he was in charge of our postcards. Well, we haven't had so much as a postcard from him. This evening I'm speaking, I should just start out I'm speaking this evening on a newspaper that we were fortunate, and I have an introduction, some of which you will have read, and I shall continue through with it. The Katchewanooka Herald was issued about 1853, 159 years ago. And it was intended to be published weekly, every Monday morning. One might say that the printing press broke, but more likely it was that the lead and the pencil broke, as it was published only intermittently for a period of about 5 years. It was a news and commentary paper produced by a few of the pupils attending Colonel Sam Strickland's agricultural school. Hence it followed that much of the style of the newspaper was similar to today's student newspaper, with considerable satire and humor. However, when one looks beyond the surface of the paper, the true value, other than the entertainment, the true value is most certainly that of being the only known record of many social exchanges, activities, and the daily life of early Lakefield. The Herald was a single copy, written on both sides, handwritten on both sides of foolscap paper, and was passed throughout the clearing, which was the name that is a term to the village of Lakefield and their surrounding settlement, the clearing, pupil to pupil, home to home. The last person, and seemingly they had a list or they knew who was the recipients, but the last person of subscribers was to return the one and only copy to the writer, the editor, the publisher, or whoever, which most often was one person. So it's desirable for me to briefly comment on the manner in which our society, our Lakefield Historical Society, is privileged to being the recipient of the writings, and some of which I have chosen to present to you this evening. In the early 1940s, Mr. Ken Mackenzie, who was the son of the first headmaster of the Grove School, and it's always known by our people around here as the Grove School. Lately it's been desirable to call it Lakefield College School, LCS, but it'll always be the Grove to us. Mr. Ken Mackenzie was the son of the first headmaster, and he delivered several handwritten sheets of this newspaper to Mr. George Douglas. He advised that these had been among the papers of his father, the late Alex W. Mackenzie, to whom they had been given to by Roland Strickland, a younger son of Sam Strickland. They were tattered, and they were torn, and in disarray, and only a portion of them could be deciphered. Mr. Douglas persevered, producing typewritten copy of that which was possible, accompanied by his excellent explanatory introduction and comments. Subsequently, what a wonderful word, subsequently. I used that in all my working career. I'll get around to that. Subsequently, in 2011, a copy of Mr. Douglas' effort was donated to our Lakefield Historical Society by Kerry Schumacher. When we look back, we owe lasting thanks and appreciation to all those hands who were involved in the writing of, the safeguarding of these papers throughout the years, such as the pupils who wrote it, certainly Sam Strickland who kept them and put them on to his son, and all the hands that passed down to reaching us. Selected excerpts from the Herald will be read by me some of this evening. Some of them I have digested and condensed, and I have removed some things which have no meaning whatsoever to what I'm trying to portray. And other than that, I think we'll find them quite enjoyable. I'd like to tell you a little story about, put your mind back into years ago. And years ago, a couple of old Lakefield area settlers, Isaac and Lazarus, they were out for the night, visiting a close neighbor, only 3.5 miles away, through a bit of bush, a lot of bush, and a few fields. And they got offered some moonshine when they arrived, and not wishing to offend their host, they drank considerable, in fact all that was offered. And leaving for home, they were a bit tizzy. And they got lost, and they were tired and weary, and a bit hammered, I might say. So they laid down in a field to rest. And it wasn't too much long later that Isaac said to Lassie, "Lassie, I'm getting so cold. I gotta get up and get moving." And up they got, and wandering around, they finally found their way out of the field, onto the trail that would take them home. And as they left the field, Lassie said, "No wonder we were so cold, Isaac. Somebody left the gate open." That's 1853 humor. Yeah. And it worked pretty well today too at Tim Hortons Coffee. Okay. My first selection here is, incidentally, it's been so long since I knew what I was going to say before I started, but the meeting was carried on so long and I just don't know what it was. Anyway, we'll try to get going here. First, a bit of introductory remarks. And this was written by George M. Douglas, who I remember as a young child who lived about halfway to Young's Point, and we visioned him as being somewhat of a recluse and certainly different, but he was just a guy who was very comfortable in himself, and he lived his life, and he was a very, very accomplished man, and I truly appreciate that when I read some of his review of this paper. And he wrote as an introduction, Samuel Strickland, who is one of our most notable, famous, really contributing persons to the development of Lakefield. Samuel Strickland was most active in inducing young men, even boys, to immigrate to Canada and to attempt to learn the arts of agriculture in this country. These young men were drawn from families of culture and generally of means, for they paid handsome premiums to Samuel himself and to some of his settler friends and previous pupils, and to be taken into their households and taught farming. In its latter stages, 20 and even 30 years later, this practice had become an absurdity. Absurdity. Yeah. Not to say a graft. But in the early days of the clearings, the scheme was a good one, and the consequences were highly beneficial to the country. The young men were drawn, as has been said, from families of culture and of means, and from Britain, from England in almost all cases. They were generally well educated, and so an element of culture was introduced into the clearings, of which the good effects may be seen to this day. It is of little consequence that these farm pupils seldom became farmers. Their apprenticeship under Sam Strickland and men of similar character was unquestionable value to them, and the country was at this time on the eve of developments wherein, by virtue of their education and training, they soon achieved notable positions in the social structure of great value and importance. And you know, it's no wonder they didn't stick to farming, because this area is really, really known as a great farming area. It's not bad, but it doesn't compare to many. So here they were being apprenticed in farmers, but people really were failures themselves, and many of them just couldn't make a go of it. They just couldn't hack it. And so, but they were smart kids, and they stayed, and they offered a lot of advantages to our area from other areas. The next topic is give you some idea of what was going on in our settlement in this day. Everybody hearing okay? Shut it down a tone or two.
Explain the clearing.
Yeah, the clearing is I believe I did say that the clearing is the village, the settlement, the Lakefield and the surrounding area. Specifically, mostly the clearing related to Samuel Strickland's property, which really is 2.5 kilometers north east of Lakefield. And that was the settlement and the farming places around it. Observation of the changes in our clearing. And this was written in May of 1856. The Falls, or more properly Lakefield, although Selby would have been a far prettier name, the former being senseless, is going ahead wonderfully. Several new houses, although not of first-rate description, have come up, yet poor as they may be, they always give an air of civilization and increase to the village. Church, mill, bridge, shoemaker's store, blacksmith shop alone would cause it to have that appellation, without the various tenements of numerous, honest, plodding artisans. The lots also are increasing in price, which of itself is a good sign. A post office, too, is of very, very great use to the community, instead of some unfortunate individual having to dash to Peterborough and act the postboy every time the English mail comes in. The postmaster also is a most kind and obliging, although a little bilious personage, and always willing to do anything to oblige his neighbors, which is a comfort. It is certainly pleasant in the extreme to live in the clearing where everybody is willing to assist to the utmost of their power him who requires their services. For instance, bees, we would not hesitate not a moment in saying, are most necessary in a newly settled country where wages are at so high a figure. A man putting up a house or a barn, for which purpose many hands are unavoidably needed, could in no way do so without the assistance of his neighbors, who in turn, when they have heavy work to be done, call on him. This species of exchanging labor brings people closer together by at once showing that without neighbors, a man might as well live in a great desert. The general state of the clearing has most wonderfully improved since the advent of our esteemed incumbent, the Reverend Percy Warren. The clergyman has hit 10. Formerly, Sunday was not much considered. Indeed, the people residing in the nearest town declared that it never passed Sawyer's Creek, which our readers well know is some 2 miles south of us. Now, service in our own little church appears to have a very beneficial tendency on the improvement of some of our community. The attendance is invariably good, and the utmost decorum is kept. No more shooting or fishing on that day, as was generally the custom. Not, of course, with us pupils, but with other residents of this part of the country. The well-dressed people and the unvaried attention they pay to the service would almost cause one to imagine oneself in an English church at home. Fearing, Mr. Editor, that you will be cramped for room, I shall finish my say another time. And the postmaster that he described at that time was Robert Casement, and he was postmaster from 1856 to 1875, and the incumbent was Reverend Percy Warren, an Anglican clergyman who was here from 1854 to 1863, and his wife passed away, so he moved back to England. My next subject is striking a blow for women's lib. And here's a sign not to give up, girls. 159 years ago, they were striving for the same thing. And this is May 12, 1856. As your valuable paper seems to be the medium of making known the grievances of all classes of people, I trust you will excuse a poor woman for telling her sad tale of woe. But remember, it is not only my case, but that of nearly every Canadian wife in the country. Did you write this, Gail? You, Mr. Editor, must be aware, being, I believe, a married man yourself, that we unfortunate wives slave, and work, from morning till night, day after day, week after week, month after month, Year after year, I've heard it all before. And what do we get for our pains? Why, nothing, forsooth. Because you say it's our duty. Well, I grant it is, but at the same time I do say that every man, having the good fortune to call himself by that time-honored name of husband, ought to make a point of giving his wife some kind of holiday and enjoyment once a year. Yes, once a year is all we ask. But even that is denied a poor Canadian wife. You men say that this is a free country. You would be shocked if anyone told you that you had slaves in Canada. But pray, what else is your life? Nothing more or less than a household slave. And yet, don't imagine that the husbands in the clearing are bad specimens of the article in question. Far from it. As I should say, they are very good ones for Canada. But it is the system of which I complain, and you had better all beware. For if something is not quickly done to give us a week's holiday at the least, I can assure you that there are serious thoughts of all the wives striking for it. And once we do that, it's all up to you. Same song and dance. The next little article I have is a visit from, my numerology is getting, a birth announcement. And it's a very unique way of announcing a birth. We have also to report, and this was May 5, 1856. We have also to report the arrival of some stranger to our rapidly increasing clearing. Mrs. Warren has presented our worthy incumbent, the Reverend Mr. Percy Warren, with another of those little tributes of affection, so gratifying to every father. I suggest to you that it probably was a girl, because he kind of went on and on for other things, and really, I mean, who's the dominant sex? I really think he wouldn't have treated so briefly had it been a male. Anyway, they're glad the baby was born, and that's it. My next little subject is a visit from absentee landlords, and these are First Nations people. Some glimpses of the Kawartha Lakes Indians of 1856 are presented herein. Our clearing, the last week, has been visited by a family of the original proprietors of this noble country. The party consists of a veteran Indian. Now get these names. Isaac Iron, from his squaw, 2 Master Irons, and Miss Iron. In those days they also had flat irons, but they were a different purpose. Anyway, I have some very good friends in Curve Lake by the name of Iron and Irons. And with her governess, Miss Maria Jacob. They are encamped opposite Colonel Strickland's in their regular Indian style, and as there are many in the clearing who have never seen anything of this kind, we should most certainly recommend them paying a visit to the camp. There may be no need of alarm, its inmates being perfectly tame, and we hear from a person who has visited them more than once that they are pleased to receive visitors, especially if they bring bullseyes or any other kind of sweetmeats with them. Anybody know what a bullseye is? A bullseye is I'm sorry I didn't hear you, but it's a small, round, hard candy. And I imagine they were probably bought at John Shear's store down there in 1856. We think it right that these Indians, our first landlords, should be treated as a friend of ours, in every respect as our equals. And, very nice that they would recognize that, but when people start telling me that I'm every bit as good as they are, they're really telling me that they really don't think I am, they just want to praise me. And I'm sorry to say that they say that I had a very strong acquaintance who used to tell a good friend of mine that, and he'd be speaking of religion, he had an upbringing in a home that was very Orange Lodge-ish, And he used to say to this good friend of mine, he'd say, "Nothing are the Catholics. They're as good as we are, aren't they?" But yet, you know, I see that. So what he was saying is that they're run of the mill is that they're not, but they're okay. All right. Enough of this blame. My next item is a community deed to erect a house. On Friday 31st, and this is May of 1858. On Friday 31st April, a good assemblage of fine young men were collected together to put up a suitable mansion for Mr. Allen to dwell in. And throughout this paper, the writers and the editors have a great deal of poking fun at themselves. Mr. Allen was one of the writers and one of the first people and the editors of the paper. But they would often write in kind of a third-person scenario and really put it to themselves. So that this is one of them. They're building a dwelling for Mr. Allen to dwell in. The cornerman, and I should explain what a cornerman was. And when you build a log cabin, when you get to the corners, they have to be all notched and they have to fit. And the cornermen are very responsible people. And they also, in the selection of logs, they choose the right logs that would do that and keep it somewhat level so that the logs don't go like this or that. So the cornerman was a pretty knowledgeable, reliable fellow. So the cornermen were R and G Strickland, who would be two sons of Sam Strickland, G Barley and J Jury. Men to supply them with logs were not wanting. There was our ever active and diligent minister, our well-dressed and dignified church warden, Mr. Ban, the ever lively Pierce, who, by the by, whenever a heavy log was going up, had just happened to go to light his pipe. The shy and retiring Mr. Barley, and others too numerous to mention. The worthy proprietor himself was, of course, too busy looking after the creature comforts of his workmen, to be able to do much himself. All worked well and cheerfully until the hour of dinner, of which they partook under a marquee, which Mr. Allen had been residing in for some time. The host had to apologize for a joint of pork being rather discolored, but that really he had been so absorbed in an article he was concocting for this Herald, that after putting the pot on the fire with the pork, he had entirely forgotten the water. Till he found that the water was needed to extinguish the fire. And which was in a mass of flames. Oh. He had no doubt that the pork was not in the slightest degree injured in its flavor, although it might not look quite all right on the outside. Judging by the small remnants left and the looks of it after dinner, none found fault with it. And you think they didn't know how to poke fun at one of each other? Yeah. Humor is something that never gets old-fashioned. I wish I had a bit of it. Now here's a dandy. There are a lot of perils. You're an early settler and there's a lot of things, like there's wolves and there's ghosts. And there's what are you smiling about, Lloyd? Do you know something more about ghosts than you're saying? Anyway, I'll carry on. On Friday, about 1:30, as Mr. Darcy was taking a nap on the sofa, his preceptor being out. Now, some of you may not realize, what is a preceptor? Well, Sam Strickland couldn't keep all these pupils with all the number he was bringing in at his place, so he would farm and apprentice them out to various semi-successful farmers in the area and let them apprentice under the different ones that he assigned them to. And a preceptor was a teacher, a tutor, and in this case it was a settler to whom the pupil was indentured. So Mr. Darcy was a pupil, and he was having a little bit of a nap because his big wheel was out. And he was suddenly aroused from a drowsy slumber by Mrs. Collins, rushing in and in great excitement telling him, And as he first imagined, that there was a whirlpool or something really drastic happening in the yard. In an instant, his ideas were collected, and he said, "I must be off for Major Strickland's anvil, because that is the thing I've read in which it will cause it to break without harm." Mrs. Collins, as she reclined fainting on a chair, said, "No, no, it's a bear or a wolf, I know not which." Mr. Darcy was in his element. In a moment he seized his rifle, which was hanging ready loaded for any such emergency, and he boldly sallied into the yard. Mrs. Collins, who was afraid to stay behind, backing him up. On arriving there, he soon spied his formidable foe standing on his hind legs in a corner of the yard, prepared to battle. At which sight Mrs. Collins was so much overcome that she had to cling to Mr. Darcy for support, praying him to take care of his precious self and forget the threat to their homestead. But the gallant Darcy, after placing Mrs. Collins on a log, valiantly advanced, rifle in hand, to attack the dangerous animal, which, seeing him approach with such a determined air, assumed its most furious aspect. But nothing daunted Mr. Darcy, who clapped his rifle to his ear and pulled the trigger, which signed its death warrant. After which he examined it, and having referred to books on natural history, he found he had killed a most dangerous specimen of the porcupine. Oh dear. Such bravery. Another one. This is early tobacco wars in the clearing. Early tobacco wars in the clearing. We thought just the no smoking campaign was recent. It's as recent as February 1856. Mr. Editor, I write to you in the hopes of enlisting the services of your able pen in our cause. I say ours because I believe I am but speaking the mind of every one of my sex in this clearing against that most horrible, and I may add, vile practice of tobacco smoking. A practice which not only causes the breath to stink, the teeth to become encrusted and rot away, and in many cases to shorten the lives of those who indulge in it, but puts them under an obligation of retiring into the kitchen or the open air while partaking of it, or else making everyone else around them uncomfortable by the choking sensation of a smoke. Another serious consideration of it is whether the expenditure it causes could not be laid out to a better purpose. These, Mr. Editor, are a few of the many objections to this most baneful practice, and you have greatly obliged me by putting them in your valuable paper. I call upon all of my sex, resident among us, to assist me in my feeble endeavors to eradicate this disgusting disease from out of your clearing. Yours truly, and guess who? A female reader. And you know what happens now? They say there's more ladies smoke than men. Anyway, puff her up. How are we doing here? Am I boring people?
No.
Okay, I'll be done in about an hour. Actually, I got, okay. Here's a celebration of the Queen's birthday. And this is January 26, 1858. Who do you suppose our Queen would be then?
Victoria. Victoria.
That's right, Victoria. She came on the throne in 1837 and stayed there to 1901. So this is a celebration of Queen Victoria's birthday. This gives another little twist to it, and it's written again by one of the pupils who's the editor of the paper, having been invited by the heads of number 1, number 2, and number 3 colleges. Now, a college is a specific art of learning in a university. Well, these colleges were the farm residence that these farmers were apprenticed to. So how humorous that he would call them the colleges. There's three colleges that invited him to attend this celebration. So to attend a public demonstration to be held at John Sheeran's store, Lakefield. So we all know the Sheeran family in Lakefield, and they were playing a big part even in those years. On Saturday evening, being the anniversary of the birth of our gracious Queen, and never being backward in our loyalty, we joined the procession which flowed from the gate of our worthy and loyal servant, Major Strickland, D.I. And D.I. stood for the Duro Invincibles. There were about 10 of such Duro Invincibles, at least there's a sketch of them, and each of them is in a magnificent uniform. I mean, Napoleon would have quivered at the sight of them, I know that. Anyway, here's the Duro Invincibles, and Major Strickland and them marched down to Lakefield to celebrate this. The Duro Invincibles, in its onward course towards the village, the air ringing with the peals of laughter of both young and old, produced by various witticisms of our gallant Major, foremost as he always is in the ranks of both danger and mirth, immediately ordered a gallon of beer, and gave the glasses being filled the toast of the day, or rather the evening, to the Queen, which was responded to by finishing the gallon. Good people live there. They know where their priorities are. A loyal blacksmith, there present, completely overcome by his feeling, valiantly stepped forward and offered, at we may say, the risk of his life, to discharge some powder placed in an anvil, if such an article could be obtained. The Major, again in the front ranks, magnanimously offered to lend, hey, I got that word right, magnanimously offered to lend his anvil if a volunteer could be found to fetch it downtown in a wheelbarrow. But we cannot describe the shock of our feelings by seeing none such step forward from the ranks of the numerous young men present. Mr. Beatty, as a further inducement and hastening to second the Major in his most loyal project, at once offered half a pound of gunpowder and gave orders for it to be immediately produced. Mr. Sheeran stepped forward in a most obliging manner, informed them that he was just out of that article, but expected some up to the clearing in a day or two. This, of course, put a stop to any thoughts of a salute from the anvil, and with the exception of John Hamlin, constable and clerk, and bailiff to Major Strickland, who, wishing to emulate his master in his loyalty, fired 3 shots from a single-barrel gun in the air. The Major, being disappointed in his favorite project and finding that nothing could be started as the night was gaining pace, returned home, and after a few more friendly glasses was followed by his friends and his pupils, who, having sung the national anthem, Old Uncle Ned, and a few verses of Yankee Doodle, before the door of the gallant Major at his home, separated peaceably to their own homes. Now, I have for grand finale, it's a long one, but it's a good one. It's the opening of the mill. And this is the last piece, so some of you who are restless can know that at least he's going to quit blabbering. This is the last one, and it's the opening of the mill. And quite sincerely, you have no idea. They talk about going to Peterborough to get the mail. Well, how about going to Peterborough, carrying a 75-pound sack of grain to get it ground and come back, or Young's Point, to Paddy Young's mill that he had at Young's Point. So a mill opening here was a big, big thing. So here we go. Oh, thank you for the water. It's a mirage, it's a mirage. We think we cannot open our paper better this week than by describing the event that took place last Monday in this clearing. An event in itself of immense importance. Trish, you drink this? Water. An event which took place last Monday in this clearing, an event in itself of immense importance to the town of Lakefield, and to all the numerous settlers around it. We allude to the opening of F.H. Darcy's grist mill. It is one step, one very long step, up the ladder, which will raise Lakefield into a town, which in the course of some years will at least equal, if not rival, Toronto. And we consider that all should feel grateful, most grateful, to the spirited proprietor, for there is no doubt it's such men as him who raise a new place out of obscurity. And if our good wishers are of any use, we, the editors of this paper, say he has, pardon me, I skipped a line. And if our good wishes are of any use, we, the editors of this paper, say he has them with all our hearts. But we must now describe the opening. We did hear that a procession from the end of the bridge to the mill was proposed, but we believe, owing to the objections of some of our clerical friends, the idea was abandoned. At 3:30 p.m., a goodly assembly collected in the noble building, amongst whom we notice the Reverend P.S. Warren, Reverend V. Clementi, as Vincent Clementi. In fact, our guest this week from Toronto was explaining to us, and very enthusiastic, that Vincent Clementi's father was one of the most renowned, noted musicians in all of England, and ranked in England as Mozart and others did in other parts of the continent. So his son here was at, no doubt, heard about it and come over to the opening of our mill. Anyway, Reverend Vincent Clementi, Lieutenant Colonel Strickland, Captain Armstrong, T. Dunlop Esquire, W. Nichols Esquire, and son, I. Garbutt Esquire, Rio Smith, and I think that Sheila's the relative of Sheila and Roy's, I. Garbutt, Rio Smith, and many others, too numerous to mention. But we must not forget T.B. Allen and F. Barley. Now here's a couple of the editors. Editors of this paper, the Katchewanooka Herald, who now return their thanks to Mr. Darcy for the giving him every assistance in his power of hearing the various speeches, and for his lucid descriptions of the complicated mechanism of the mill. After the wheat had been placed in the hopper, most anxiously was every eye turned to the flouring bin. It was some little time, however, before any flour came, owing to the numerous crevices having to be filled up. At length it came, and to behold the numbers that rushed to see, to feel, to smell, and even to taste, you would suppose that they'd never seen flour before. Our own opinion of it is that if it only sticks to our insides, as it did to the outside of the best black surtout. Anybody know what a surtout is? Anyone? Great to be so good. I had to look it up, and I found it, believe it or not, in the second dictionary I looked. A surtout is a long man's overcoat. So this was a black surtout. So what the editors are saying, if it sticks to our insides, as it did to the outside of the best black long overcoat, we shall soon improve in condition. All were satisfied with the work of the mill. It was stuffed. Lieutenant Colonel Strickland was put on the table. The gallant colonel, knowing that we were all loyal men before him, begged to propose the health of the eldest daughter of our beloved queen, who on that day was to be united to the Prince of Prussia. What a wonderful thing. There were men there now before him who had fought by his side, and he would venture to say they would do so again. Loud cries echoed to that statement. Yes, yes! And would do their very best to support the queen and the land of their birth, which was responded again by loud cheers. He coupled Mr. Darcy's health with the princess's health, because it would save time, he said, and he did not think it likely she would hear of it, and if she did, he hoped that she and her worthy husband might be as prosperous as Mr. Darcy and his mill. He then called for 3 cheers for each, which were given with great spirit. Mr. Darcy was then assisted onto the table and received with a round of applause. Mr. Darcy thanked the gallant colonel for proposing a toast to his health and the company present for the enthusiastic manner in which they had drank it. He wished he had better accommodation for giving them for a good time, a thing he knew generally was expected at a mill, but such as it was, they were heartily welcome to enjoy themselves as best they could. Mr. Darcy then made room for Colonel Strickland, who said that in his last speech he had left out a most important thing, which was to name the mill. But he thought it would have sounded curious talking of a marriage of the princess and a christening so close together. I guess he was just at the wrong time, so have to get off it right now. Anyway, so he allowed a little time to elapse before doing so. He now declared the mill to be called the Katchewanooka Mill, hoping that by that brand his flour would soon be known all over the world. He then proposed Mr. Shaw's health, who was the builder of the mill. Mr. Shaw deputized Mr. W. Ray to return thanks for him. Mr. Ray commenced his thanks by saying that Mr. Shaw was a Yankee foreigner. he then drank of his whiskey and water and did not seem disposed to say any more. Mr. Shaw himself then stepped forward and said he took the job to make money. And took it to make money from the endeavor, but he failed. And he would take care he would not do so another time. He then got off the table and blew his nose without a pocket handkerchief. He then got off the table and blew his nose without a pocket handkerchief, as is the American custom after public speaking. I know Barack Obama does that all the time. Mr. T. Bird proposed the man who had made the country the success it was, the farmers of Smith and Durrell. Mr. Fitzgerald and Lieutenant Colonel Strickland returned thanks. Mr. Barley then sang The Englishman. Mr. Darcy sang Villikins and his Dinah. Mr. Bird then, in a very neat speech, begged to say that there was one person present who had been entirely forgotten. One whose arm had been raised in the Crimea in defense of his country, and who bore on his noble breast one of those medals our gracious Queen was pleased to bestow on all those noble hearts, and who had fought and bled for her. He was moreover connected with the mill, rather say with the mill's owner. He proposed the health of Mr. Darcy, drank with loud applause. Mr. Darcy, with a frank and fearless air of the true British seaman, in a voice that might be heard all over the vast building, as easily as it would have been on the main topsail in a gale of wind. He begged to say that he was unaccustomed to public speaking, but that the British flag might ever wave over the united countries of England and Canada, and that was his most earnest wish, and that no one, wherever he might be, should ever disgrace the name of an Englishman. Mr. Band then favored the company with his song of The Flag That Has Braved for 1,000 Years. It might have been from our not over-correct ear for music, but we fancied that he was a little too high. Might have been from the drink he had. Anyway, a native of the United States then sang a little more cider, of which we would have thought he had had sufficient. Different gentlemen then favored the company with their opinions on various objects. When Mr. Barley was called on for a song, he immediately trolled forth a ditty in that well-known style for which he is so renowned, and brought down a round of applause. Mr. John Sanderson then endeavored to enliven the company, but owing to a defective memory, could not get out more than one verse. Mr. Barley then sang the national anthem, in which all joined in grand chorus. Most of the gents then departed, with the exception of a few of Mr. Darcy's most intimate friends, who stopped to assist him in putting away all the debris. Most luckily, the latter gentleman, Mr. H. Lefevre, as he was kindly seeing that the tap of the whiskey barrel was turned the right way, remembered that a most important toast had been forgotten. Nothing daunted, even at the scantiness of his audience, which had mostly departed, he rushed to the table, notwithstanding his extremely short legs, got up on it, even without assistance. He then stated that they had all assembled here that day to celebrate the opening of Mr. F.H. Darcy's mill. Now, gentlemen, said he, warming to his subject, what can a mill do without that very necessary appendage? A miller. How can the mill grind? Is it not necessary to have a miller before it can attempt anything of the kind? Of course it is. Every sensible person knows that. Well, gentlemen, I now propose to the health of Mr. McCrae, a person to whom Mr. Darcy has engaged as a miller. He appears, from what I can judge, to be well fitted for a situation. I propose his health, trusting that his milling experience will turn out to be the benefit of his master. And the toast was duly honored, and so ended the festivity, and so ends mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. That was fascinating. Break out that barrel of beer. That was fascinating when you sort of try and put it in perspective and say 159 years ago or something to that effect. It just sort of blows your mind that some of this prose was absolutely terrific, and some of the pronunciation was terrible. But we certainly enjoyed your speech, Neil, and thanks ever so much. Is the coffee about ready, Tricia?
Ready, yes.
Coffee and cookies will be